The tale of King Midas comes from Greek mythology. In Greek, mythos is a story or a tale. A myth is a fantastic story and its protagonist is a fabulous being that may or may not have existed, and that explains events that have occurred or explains natural phenomena. For instance, how do rays arise? The myth says that it is Zeus who throws them on the earth. In the case of King Midas, it is a myth about a king who actually lived a long time ago. He ruled a kingdom called Phrygia, and Midas became famous because he liked riches very much. He was very brave. He fought and conquered lands. He treasured immense wealth in his palace and traded with other peoples with what became richer every time, but it is already known that sometimes the one who wants the most, and Midas was like that. He had a lot, but he always longed to have more and more and plus. The story of Midas and his ambition for riches is as follows. One day, walking through his domain, Midas met Silenus, who literally slept the monkey. Seeing him in that state, he welcomed him into his palace and ordered that they take care of him until he was recovered. Silenus was the father of Dionysus, who among Greek myths was the god of wine. The Greeks had many gods, and through these gods they explained everything that happened in life. There was a god of thunder, a god of the winds, a goddess of crops, and so on. Because Dionysus was the god of wine. When Silenus recovered and told his son Dionysus how well Midas had been with him, Dionysus went to meet him and in a gesture of gratitude granted him a wish. Whatever he wanted. Midas got excited and began to think, what could he ask as a wish of a god? Strength, value, years of life, health? He was chattering for a long time, and in the end he asked for the golden touch. What's that? Well, that he could have the power to turn everything he touched into gold. In this way his wealth would be the greatest of all the kings of the earth. Because even if he spent and spent, he could turn everything he touched into gold, and thus would be immensely rich forever as long as I lived. Are you sure? Dionysus asked him. Yes. Midas answered, very sure. Dionysus touched him and Midas instantly got his wish from him. To do the test, the first thing Midas did was touch a stone that was right there, and instantly the stone turned to gold. Smiling and satisfied, Midas thanked Dionysus for the favor granted, and carrying his stone now turned into pure gold, he went smiling to the room where he kept his treasures. In that room there were countless treasures. Trays, jewels, crowns, necklaces, jugs, and many coins that were already made of gold. More content than a few Easter, he grabbed the coins and piled them one on top of the other, forming towers. Then he threw the towers of his gold coins and raised other towers again. He was playing in this way for a long time, and getting up began to touch everything that surrounded him and that was not made of gold: the wall, the floor, his sandals, one of the oil lamps that illuminated the room, and of course as soon as he touched any such a thing as it had the gift of the touch of gold, immediately turned into pure and brilliant gold. The marble floor was turned into pure gold. The wall immediately became a smooth and shining wall of gold. Midas excitedly reflected on the gold wall and began to dance. As soon as he touched the oil lamp, he immediately became in gold, and the flame stopped illuminating because the flame was no longer fire but gold. He was in the room singing and dancing for a long time until he got hungry. So much joy and enthusiasm had whetted his appetite. He went to the door of the room and asked his guards to call the servants to bring him food and drink. Sitting on a small throne that he had in the room, he waited, and soon a servant appeared with a tray of fruit and wine. Midas, at the moment of touching the tray to put it on his lap, it turned to gold. The servant was amazed at such a wonder. Midas, when he saw the fool's face, that the servant had laughed out loud. "Ha ha ha! You will see the wonders that from now on your eyes will see." Taking the king a bunch of grapes that was on the tray, at the moment it turned into a splendid bunch of golden grapes. This time it was Midas who made a face of astonishment, and the poor servant continued with his eyes open in disbelief of what he was witnessing. Midas, seeing the bunch of golden grapes, smiled nervously, and then taking a piece of melon that came on the tray, it also turned into solid gold. Midas began to get scared at such a situation. Everything he touched turned to gold: the bread, the napkin, the strawberries, the plate with figs, the figs themselves. He threw the tray to the ground and died of fear. He approached the servant, that the poor man was really paralyzed with fright, seeing everything he was observing. He could not believe what was happening before his eyes. "Remove that stupid face," Midas yelled at him, and getting up angrily pushed him, and instantly the poor servant was turned into solid gold. "No!" screeched Midas. The soldiers guarding the treasure entered immediately to see what was happening. "No!" the king shouted at him. "Stay away, call my doctors." The soldiers immediately went to warn the palace doctors, and they came running to see what was happening. They found the frightened and weeping king on his throne, surrounded by all those treasures. "Majesty, to you," asked one of the doctors, "does your stomach hurt?" Midas was crying, scared. At the question he only shook his head and pointed to the servant, that the poor man was turned into a statue of pure gold. The astonished doctors did not quite understand what King Midas wanted to say, because he was only pointing to the statue. But since they had never entered the treasure room before, because it was extremely forbidden, they did not know what the king was referring to, now pointing to the tray, now the plate of figs, and then the servant. In his discomfort he was unable to say a word and only sobbed and pointed. One of the doctors came over to take his pulse and see if he was having palpitations, or if perhaps he had a fever and was delirious. As soon as the doctor touched something, Midas's arm was instantly hunched there, turned into a statue of gold. The other doctors backed away in fear. "What magic is this?" asked one of them. Midas told him about his meeting with Dionysus and the gift he had given her for taking care of Silenus. "So everything you touch will turn to gold?" asked one of the doctors. Midas nodded. "I know," said another of the doctors. "Put on some Majesty gloves so you won't touch anything with your hands." Gloves were instantly brought in, and Midas put him on. He touched a vase with some plants that was in the window, and instantly the vase, the earth, the plants, even a butterfly that he fluttered among the plants, everything was turned to gold. Midas got desperate and began to throw everything on the ground. "I will starve," he said, scared. "And if they feed you?" asked another doctor. "That way you will not touch the food with your hands." Another servant came with a tray and food and drink. Midas sat on his throne, and the servant, taking a little soup with a spoon, brought it to Midas's mouth. But as soon as the spoon touched the king's mouth, it turned to gold and the soup in it was equal. The king began to cry very dejected, thinking of the misfortune that had befallen him because of his greed and his desire to possess treasures and riches. The doctors accompanied him to his royal room and asked that no one come near him, much less touch him. Midas, alone and abandoned in his room, did not know what to do. The bed had turned into gleaming gold. The sheet with which he wanted to cover himself no longer served his purpose because it had become a rigid sheet, yes, of pure gold, very pretty and shiny, but it was useless to clothe herself. Anguished, desperate and hungry and thirsty, he went out to see if he found Dionysus. He called out to him and yelled his name everywhere, but Dionysus didn't answer. Thinking that he would die of hunger and alone, Midas sat next to the Pactolo river that passed through there. Dionysus, seeing Midas's sadness, approached him and asked, "And good? Are you happy with your touch of gold?" Oh, Midas was surprised to see Dionysus. "No. Please, make me normal again. Take away this gift that I ambitiously asked of you. I want to eat. I want to drink. I want to be able to touch those around me without turning them into golden statues." Dionysus felt sadness for Midas and said, "Okay. Bathe in this river that you have next to you, and when you come out your touch of gold will have disappeared." Midas did so. He bathed for a long time, scrubbing himself well with the river water, and when he came out of the water he touched some reeds and nothing. Grass and nothing. They were still daisies and smelled like daisies. Midas laughed happily, and on the way to his palace, he touched everything that crossed the path. When he arrived, the first thing he did was look for the servant that he had turned into a statue of gold, and he found him stunned but of flesh and blood. Everything he had turned to gold with his magic touch was back to how it was before. That night Midas gave himself a feast of the hunger he had, and well, this time the doctors did have to give him some infusions because with so much food he had given him a stomachache, but what a pleasant pain, Midas thought. And it happened that in the river where Midas bathed to remove the gift of gold, since then there are golden sparkles and its waters drag gold dust. Well, be careful with what you want. Not always what at first seems good turns out to be as good as we thought.
Και τη χρυσή καδένα Κωνσταντίνια